Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. COVID aside, climate change and carbon emissions seem to be the most dominant issue. Think back to our federal election just a few months ago. Climate change featured prominently. And think of all the global emissions and financial commitments made at COP26, the UN climate change conference held in the UK several weeks ago. Billions and trillions of dollars committed to reducing carbon emissions. But is throwing money at a problem the best solution? Are carbon emissions actually an untapped resource? Now, you might say, Tanya, what on earth are you suggesting? Carbon emissions, they aren't a resource, they're a burden. But are they? Well, not for some Canadian innovators who are using their ingenuity to find solutions to carbon emissions and are converting this resource into dollars at the same time. And this is surely something to celebrate. Well, joining me now to highlight some of these Canadian innovators is Colin Craig, secondstreet.org president and author of their latest policy brief, 25 Innovative Carbon Tech Examples. Colin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Tanya.
So when did this all start to happen? I know that Canada, we used to see carbon as being such a burden, as something we need to get rid of. In some cases, we had to tax emitters, large carbon emitters. We still do. How did we go from carbon is a burden to perhaps something that we need to tap?
That's a good question. I think we've seen more and more over the past probably 5 years or so, all kinds of innovators in Canada. There's certainly lots of examples in Canada, but around the world saying, wait a second, carbon dioxide, ultimately it's made of two elements, carbon and oxygen. And those two elements are often used to make all kinds of things that we use in our daily lives. And so we've seen all kinds of really cool examples of entrepreneurs capturing carbon dioxide and then using it to make useful products instead of letting it release into the atmosphere. And, I think it's awesome what they're doing. I think we need to talk about it more. That's why we wrote a policy brief on this topic, because so much of the discourse in Canada, it's all doom and gloom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very positive. We should be talking to kids about this, inspiring them so that they want to become the next generation of entrepreneurs that are engaged in this activity, and give these companies more profile and more exposure so that it could even maybe help them raise venture capital.
You mentioned the doom and gloom sense of it all, and it's true. I recall even during the last federal election just several weeks ago, there were lawn signs popping up that said climate emergency, climate crisis. And of course, a lot of this is tied into carbon emissions. And to think that there are companies out there who are actually finding practical solutions, and not only what do we do with this carbon, but we're actually going to erase it. That's amazing. So let's talk about some of these examples. Can you give us one of your favorite examples of which companies out there leading?
Yeah, one of my favorites is a company in New York. It's called Air Company. And what they've actually been able to do with captured carbon dioxide is create something like this. This is a bottle of vodka. And they have created this vodka with just two ingredients, carbon dioxide and water. And,
Wow.
It took me a while to figure out, well, wait, how on earth are they doing this? Like, this sounds like magic. And if you really think about it, the main ingredient in vodka is ethanol. And that's made up of three elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And you can find those same three elements in carbon dioxide and water, H2O. So what this company has been able to do is figure out how to rejig all the elements from those two ingredients, so to speak, and create ethanol. And then ethanol is blended with water to ultimately end up with vodka. So it's amazing what they've done. That same company has also been able to create hand sanitizer with captured carbon dioxide. And so that's obviously a product that a lot of people are using nowadays because of COVID. So it's these are just two great examples from a New York company.
On that moment, for just to pause you there, and I recall during the early days of the COVID crisis, and we're talking March 2020, when there was this big rush to get PPE and masks and hand sanitizer, and you couldn't find this in any store because it was being, taken off the shelves at the moment it arrived. And I recall seeing distillers transforming their production from going from distilling alcohol to distilling or to using their products to create hand sanitizer. So this seems sort of on the same vein.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's probably part of how they're able to create hand sanitizers. It's maybe using some of the ingredients that are made while they've created the vodka.
I
And
want to
often,
talk about some more of these issues. We've got to cut to a commercial break right now, but when we get back, we'll pick it right up. Welcome back. We're discussing the exciting topic of Canadian innovation, where we're capturing CO2, carbon emissions, and transforming them into something useful. We're actually helping the world. And joining me for this discussion is Colin Craig, president of secondstreet.org. Colin, I was fascinated about this vodka company that is taking something that is seen as a negative and, in my opinion, making it into something positive. Share with us some more examples.
yeah, and you know what I said in the beginning there, that there's lots of great examples happening here in Canada. There's a company in Calgary that has been able to create this with captured CO2, and this
I
is
can't
bar
see it.
soap.
Can you move it a little to the center? What do you got
There
there?
we go.
There we go.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
This bar soap. They've also created this product, which is a bottle of soap. And this was created by a company. It's called Clean O2. You can order these projects or these products online through Expedition Air is one company that's selling it. But the story behind that was, it was someone in the heating and ventilation business, and they realized that buildings they're burning natural gas to keep warm quite a bit in the winter, obviously. And the entrepreneur thought, well, wait a second, why don't we try and capture some of that CO2 that's going up into the atmosphere and mix it with, I believe it was potassium, to create a product that's used to help with the production of soap. So this is just one example from Calgary. Another company, we went and toured their facility. It's called Upcycling. And what they're doing is taking CO2 from a natural gas power plant, and they're mixing it with fly ash to create an additive for concrete or cement so that you can make concrete. And
Wow.
just recently, they were even pouring some foundations for homes using it. And ultimately what it does is you're able to reduce CO2 emissions, but at the same time, it actually makes the concrete stronger. So you're helping to improve the product.
So this is a company that's taking their own emissions and repurposing them, if you will.
Well, they've partnered up with a natural gas power plant in Calgary. And so what they do is together they're able to channel some of the CO2 from that power plant. This company, Carbon Upcycling, takes that CO2 and then they mix it with fly ash and they use it as an additive to make the concrete stronger. So a lot of these companies, they're still relatively small. But what I think we're seeing is positive growth. There's lots of signs that some of them are going to be taking off and expanding and expanding. And once you start to get scale, then I think you're going to see more and more CO2 being reduced on a much larger scale. So those are a couple examples from Calgary. There's a company from New York that's actually taking CO2 and making diamonds with it.
Diamonds.
So yeah, I mean, that one's just fascinating how they do it. But diamonds are ultimately made with carbon,
right? And
they're able to take that carbon from the CO2, create diamonds. A company from Ontario, I love this example because I'm a big fan of M&Ms. But what they do is they take CO2 from a smokestack and they pump it into a tank. And in that tank is a bunch of algae. And the algae basically eat the CO2 and grow and keep expanding. And then they're able to process that algae into all kinds of things that are useful products, nutraceuticals. They're working on biofuels. They can create something called phycocyanin, which is it's an additive that helps make blue food coloring. Oh. And that blue food coloring is used in things like blue M&Ms.
Okay, so I can then eat copious amounts of blue M&Ms and not only say I'm making myself feel better, but I'm also doing my bit for the planet.
Exactly, and you wash it down with vodka, then you're gonna.
And then I'm really doing. I'm hitting everything out of the park. Good for me. My goodness,
exactly.
These are some excellent innovations. I didn't know these things were happening. How come we didn't know?
You know, I'm not sure exactly why. I don't think there's any kind of a conspiracy theory, but I think you see quite often politicians and governments, they're focusing in on the doom and gloom. We hear constantly that we're in a climate crisis. Then we see politicians do the opposite. You know, we just had 400 people or so go off to the recent big environmental conference in Glasgow, when obviously a lot of those people could have video conferenced. So if they're going to tell us that it's a crisis, I think they have to lead by example and say, hey, wait, we're going to video conference and send a much smaller Canadian delegation. That's another topic. But my point is that when you're saying it's a crisis, you have to lead by example. We hear them saying too that it's CO2 is pollution, pollution, pollution. When we're seeing entrepreneurs say, wait a second, that's not the way to look at this. Let's think of that as a product that we could use to create useful things for consumers. So I think really what we're seeing is we're seeing entrepreneurs leading to tackle this issue rather than, I'll say, narrow-minded, short-sighted politicians that I don't think understand how we're ultimately going to address CO2 emissions as a country.
And I think you bring up a great point. We have so many experts and so many great minds in this country. If we just let innovators do what they do best and support them, we could solve a lot of problems. Anyways, we got to go to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back. What if I told you that all these carbon emissions that are happening in Canada, that these big producers, even the little ones produce, that they could be harnessed and tapped, and that Canada really has an untapped resource that we need to do more with? Well, joining me to discuss this is Colin Craig, president of secondstreet.org. Colin, you've highlighted some excellent examples of how Canadian innovators and even international ones, some of them based in America and beyond, are finding ways using technology to capture carbon and repurpose it. So not only are we not even creating something new, we're taking something that's seen as a negative and cleaning up the world in the same process.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very inspiring what's happening. I think we need to talk more and more about it. I'm glad that you wanted to have this conversation because I don't think we can talk about it enough. I'll just give you one more great example. There's a company in Calgary, they're starting up, and what they're doing is they're creating carbon nanofibers with captured CO2. And, if you ever look at a badminton racket, quite often you'll see on the racket, it'll say that it's made with carbon fibers. You might pick up a lightweight bicycle and the frame is made with carbon fibers.
Right.
Well, that material's been around for a long time. The difference is that this company is now making it with captured CO2. So there's all kinds of really, really innovative things that are happening. And like I say, I think we need to chat about these more, because I think ultimately it's going to be technology that's going to help us reduce emissions.
Now, how expensive is this technology? Obviously, you've given me an array of products, from making nanofibers for, something like tennis rackets to creating diamonds from capturing CO2 and vodka. Are these products competitive price-wise with what's already on the market?
Well, I think that in some cases they are, and I think in some cases they probably will be. Quite often with new technology, it starts off with a high price tag. We see that with all kinds of products. I think back to when DVD players first came on the market. They cost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And then over time, you could even pick them up for, I don't know, $80, $50 or whatever it is, right?
Or for free on Kijiji or something.
Free on Kijiji, you might, yeah, I'm sure you can find them free. But they, the cost comes down with technology. So for some of these products, it might be expensive. The example that I just mentioned with the carbon nanofibers, that company's CEO was just on television talking about their product, and she said that they can actually produce it very cost effectively for less than current conventional ways of producing that material. So that was a very positive sign when I heard that. I thought that's awesome. The diamond example, I went on their website. Everyone spends a different amount of money on diamonds, but from what I could tell, it looked like it was in the ballpark of what some people spend on diamonds right now. So I think more and more over time, we're going to see this innovative carbon tech industry continue to evolve. Their price structures are going to become more competitive and more competitive. And I think it's pretty awesome what we're seeing.
And I think just on that diamond file, there are many Canadians who, after, the idea of or the concept of conflict diamonds came to our mind, were really hesitant to purchase just any random diamond. They really want to know, where was this sourced? Was it sourced ethically? Well, something like this, I see it as a triple win. Not only are you, yes, getting a pretty diamond, but you're also sourcing it ethically, and you're also actually doing a positive in the world. It's not being mined. It's actually being created from turning a negative into a positive, if you will. And so that to me just seems like an all good situation.
Oh, it is for sure. And, I should be clear. I got a couple samples of these other products. I didn't get any samples of the diamonds.
Oh, that's too bad. I was going to say, you can send it to me. I could show it on camera. Not sure you're going to get it back, but I can show you.
Next time.
My goodness. And so with this technology, is it accessible? Like if if there are innovators out there who are saying, hey, that's something I should look into. I want to use this untapped resources and do my fair share. Uh, is it hard? Is it challenging for these innovators to get access to this technology, or is it shared openly?
I think we're seeing a lot of really cool examples of companies in this space cooperating. Um, this positive example here in Calgary where they're taking captured CO2 from a natural gas power plant. Well, it's sort of almost like a place where you can just go in and hook up your company to that resource, and it's the city's NMAX utility, I believe, that runs that natural gas power plant. They've been very good about allowing companies to kind of come in and use the CO2 because it's a win-win ultimately.
Right.
That utility that's using natural gas to make electricity, well, they want to reduce the amount of CO2 that's going into the atmosphere. So if a company comes along and they're going to use it, that's a positive. So I think we're seeing a lot of really good examples like that. We're actually seeing a lot of good examples of oil and gas companies working to help out. The Canadian Gas
Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause you there for a second. I do want to dive into that, and we've got to cut to a commercial break, so just stick around.
Okay.
Welcome back. We're talking about capturing CO2 emissions and doing something good with them, cleaning the environment and producing something. And joining me again is Colin Craig from secondstreet.org. Colin, before we went to commercial break, you were sharing with some of the oil and gas industry, which usually gets a bad rap as being large emitters. What are they doing to help out with these innovations of repurposing and using the resource, which is carbon?
So one example would be the Canadian Gas Association. So these are all the companies that are involved in getting natural gas to your house to keep it warm in the winter, generally the local utilities. And what they've created is a natural gas innovation fund. And that innovation fund is helping these startups get off the ground with grants. They're giving them some money. They're helping them with some to test their equipment and so forth. So they've been really good at trying to help this industry get up off the ground because, again, they're trying to find ways to reduce emissions. In Alberta, the oil sands, there's a lot of companies up there, obviously, creating oil. And what they've created is something called the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. And with that, they actually sponsored a major prize for companies to find ways to reduce emissions. So it was a huge prize. I believe it was $20 million. They were a co-sponsor of it. And, I mentioned at the beginning, the company from New York, Air Company, that is making vodka. Well, they were one of the finalists. Carbon Upcycling, the company in Calgary that is making that cement additive with captured CO2. They were another finalist. So they've been helping out. And when it's something really cool that's happening in the oil sands, actually, is with that alliance, they're sharing technology. So if one company creates some new technology that reduces emissions, they actually share it with all the other companies. They don't share their other trade secrets naturally because these are competitors, but when it comes to helping the environment, they will share technology if it's something that's reducing emissions.
That's
so
very Canadian,
there's a lot
very Canadian of them.
Very Canadian, yeah. There's a lot of collaboration happening in the sector. It's very very cool and inspiring to see ultimately what we observed. And like I say, it's all in the policy brief if people want to read up more about these examples,
which they can find at secondstreet.org. Colin, I have to say, and if my visage doesn't show it, like, I'm just excited about this. You're right. There has been such a projection of doom and gloom. Greta Thunberg, telling us that, we're not doing good enough, But here are companies who actually are making a huge difference. And when I see that there's a private partnership, meaning these stakeholders, these private gas companies and whatnot, are working to help fund this innovation, I think that's terrific. But then I ask myself, what's our government doing? Because I know we have a lot of carbon taxation. I know we're told to cut emissions. And these are all, I'm not for the carbon tax. Everybody knows that. But, cutting emissions, okay, obviously don't do more than you need to. But this is something good. Is our government getting behind these initiatives?
I think yes and no. They have been handing out some grants here and there. They're talking about creating a new tax credit to help out this sector. And when you read the language that they've used so far, I believe they said, they could create this to help at least 30 megatons or something like that. They're kind of talking about a small amount. Canada, for perspective, releases about 700 megatons of CO2 per year. So I'm a real optimist when it comes to this sector. I think there's a lot that can be done. And when you're talking kind of down here about the size of the tax credit when it could be much larger, I think that government could get behind this better. And I think there's actually a better way of supporting this sector. And I had a column on it recently, and people could see that on our website. But I think what we could do is develop more and more of our oil and gas resources as a country, because the reality is if we don't produce it, some other country will.
Right.
But I think the catch should be you take the money that governments get from those new projects and you dedicate it towards reducing emissions. So that way, Canada would be an even better leader when it comes to the environment and the energy sector.
I agree. And, to rely solely on taxation as a negative incentive, I mean, it's so 1920s, if you will.
Yeah.
Really, I think we could do a lot better as a country. And I think your suggestions are right. And you're right. If we're not producing our own oil, it's sitting on a tanker coming to our ports elsewhere. So where somebody else
Yeah.
is producing it, and probably a lot more dirtier than Canada. Colin, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you. Please keep us up to date, because I think we all want to get behind some of these projects.
Well, thanks a lot. And like I said, I'm really glad that you helped bring shine a spotlight on this, because it's really inspiring what's happening out there.
Thank you so much. Amidst all the negative stuff happening with COVID, this has been a real feel-good episode, because here we have a company, or several companies rather, that are innovating and doing something amazing, taking a negative and turning it into a positive. And surely that is something to celebrate. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.